Have you ever wondered what Las Vegas really looked like before the neon lights, luxury casinos, and endless nightlife? Long before it became the entertainment capital of the world, this desert town was a small and struggling community trying to survive one of the hardest economic moments in American history. Today on MemoryLens US, we invite you to step back into the Las Vegas of the 1930s and explore the lesser-known realities of life during that time. If you enjoy historical stories like this, please consider subscribing to MemoryLens US, and feel free to like and share this video so more people can discover these forgotten chapters of American history. The visuals in this video are symbolic historical recreations and may not perfectly match every moment described, and we appreciate your understanding. Now settle in, relax, and we hope this journey brings you a quiet moment of nostalgia and reflection. When people think about Las Vegas today, they imagine bright lights, endless casinos, and a city that never seems to sleep. But if we travel back to the early 1930s, the place we would find might surprise you. Las Vegas was not a famous entertainment capital. It was a small desert railroad town with a population of only about 5,000 people. Instead of neon lights, streets, modest wooden buildings, and the constant sound of trains passing through the valley, life here felt isolated from the rest of the country. The town sat in the middle of the Mojave Desert, surrounded by dry land and intense summer heat. Water was limited, infrastructure was basic, and most people depended on the railroad or small local businesses to survive. For many residents, daily life was simple and often difficult. You would see shop owners sweeping dust from their doorways each morning while families tried to make a living in a place where opportunity was never guaranteed. At the same time, the entire United States was struggling through the Great Depression. By the early 1930s, unemployment across the country had reached around 25%. Businesses were failing, banks were collapsing, and millions of Americans were searching desperately for work. Even though Las Vegas was small, it could not escape the pressure of this national crisis. For the people living in the town, the future often felt uncertain. Residents understood that without new jobs or outside investment, Las Vegas itself might struggle to survive. What we now know as a global entertainment city was, at that moment in history, simply a fragile desert community trying to hold on during one of the hardest economic periods in American history. For many people in Las Vegas during the early 1930s, hope arrived in the form of a massive construction project taking shape not far from the city. The Hoover Dam, originally known as the Boulder Canyon Project, promised something that was desperately needed across the country at the time. It promised jobs. In the middle of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were out of work, the dam became one of the largest sources of employment in the entire nation. The news traveled quickly. Men from across the United States began heading towards southern Nevada, believing that the desert valley might offer them a second chance. Many arrived with little more than a suitcase, a worn pair of boots, and the hope that they could earn a steady paycheck building one of the greatest engineering projects in American history. For the small town of Las Vegas, this project became an economic lifeline. Local businesses suddenly saw more customers. Boarding houses filled up. Restaurants served long lines of workers and job seekers. For the first time in years, it seemed possible that the town might survive the economic storm that had crippled much of the country. But the story was not only one of opportunity. The number of men arriving in the valley quickly exceeded the number of available jobs. Thousands came searching for work that simply did not exist for everyone. Many of them stayed anyway, hoping their luck would change. By late 1930, Las Vegas faced a heartbreaking reality. The town had one of the longest bread lines in the United States when measured against its small population. In a place where opportunity had drawn so many people, hunger and disappointment became a daily sight. The Hoover Dam brought hope to the desert, but for many who came chasing that hope, the experience was far more complicated. Life in the Las Vegas Valley during the early 1930s could be extremely harsh, especially for the thousands of people who arrived hoping to work on the Hoover Dam. The Mojave Desert was beautiful in its own way, but it was also unforgiving. Summers brought intense heat that could push temperatures well past 100 degrees. For people living in tents or simple wooden shelters, the desert sun was not just uncomfortable, it could be dangerous. Before modern infrastructure reached the region, sanitation and basic services were limited. Water had to be carefully managed, and many temporary camps had very few facilities. Dust storms, heat, and poor living conditions were part of everyday life for many workers and their families. Some of the earliest dam workers lived in a makeshift settlement that locals came to call Ragtown. Families set up tents and simple shelters made from scrap materials while they waited for more permanent housing to be built. Historical accounts describe how difficult those early months were. The extreme heat and lack of proper shelter caused serious health problems for some residents, and several people suffered fatal heat exhaustion during that period. Conditions could also be difficult within Las Vegas itself. Along Las Vegas Creek, small squatter camps appeared, where people who could not afford housing tried to survive. These settlements were often built from discarded boards, crates, and other materials that could be found nearby. The camps reflected the desperation of the time. In one cleanup effort in the early 1930s, authorities even discovered the partially decomposed remains of a person hidden in the brush, a grim reminder of how fragile life could be during the hardest years of the Great Depression. When we look back today, it is easy to forget how physically demanding daily life in the desert once was. For many people who lived through those years, simply enduring the environment itself was a daily struggle. As the Great Depression continued to strain Nevada's economy, state leaders began looking for bold ways to attract money and visitors. In 1931, Nevada made a decision that would permanently shape the identity of Las Vegas. The state legalized gambling. At the time, this was not about creating a glamorous entertainment capital. It was a practical attempt to stimulate an economy that had been deeply damaged by the Depression. Small casinos and gaming rooms soon appeared across the town. Many of these early establishments were simple places with wooden floors, card tables, and a steady flow of travelers and workers hoping for a bit of luck. Compared with the polished resorts that would appear decades later, these gambling halls were modest and rough around the edges. Still, they brought new life to the town and began attracting visitors from outside the region. Around the same time, Nevada introduced another law that made the state unusual. The residency requirement for divorce was reduced to only 6 weeks. For many Americans trapped in unhappy marriages during a difficult economic period, this became a legal shortcut that few other states offered. Reno became especially famous for divorce seekers, but Las Vegas also began to see visitors who came specifically to end their marriages. Not everything happening in the city was respectable. One area known as Block 16 developed a reputation for prostitution and illegal alcohol sales. Although the United States was still under prohibition during the early part of the decade, enforcement in Las Vegas was inconsistent. Drinking establishments often operated quietly, and alcohol could still be found with surprising ease. When you imagine Las Vegas in the 1930s, it was not yet the glittering city we know today, but the foundations of its reputation were already forming. In a time of economic hardship, the town embraced activities that many other places still tried to restrict, setting Las Vegas on a path that would eventually make it famous around the world. When we look back at Las Vegas in the 1930s, one of the hardest truths to confront is how deeply racial discrimination shaped everyday life in the city. Early Las Vegas had once been a small railroad town where different groups of workers lived relatively close together. But during the years of the Hoover Dam construction, those patterns began to change in painful ways. As thousands of new workers arrived in southern Nevada, many of them came from parts of the American South where segregation was already deeply entrenched. Over time, racial boundaries in Las Vegas hardened. Black residents who had previously lived and worked near the downtown area increasingly faced pressure to move away from the center of the city. City officials began directing black families to a neighborhood west of the railroad tracks, an area that later became known as the historic West Side. For many families, this was not a voluntary move. It was the result of policies and decisions that limited where black residents could live or operate businesses. The West Side soon became a segregated district, physically separated from the more developed parts of town. Living conditions there were extremely difficult. Historical records show that a large portion of the homes were simple wooden shacks. Many lacked indoor plumbing, running water, or proper sanitation. Streets were often unpaved, and basic city services were limited. Opportunities were also restricted when it came to the Hoover Dam project. Around 20,000 people eventually worked on the construction of the dam, yet only 44 of those workers were black. Even among that small number, most were assigned the most physically demanding and lowest paid jobs. For many African American families in Las Vegas, the 1930s were years of resilience in the face of clear inequality. Despite the barriers placed in front of them, communities in the West Side built churches, social clubs, and small businesses that helped neighbors support one another during an incredibly difficult chapter of American history. During the darkest years of the Great Depression, Las Vegas faced a difficult challenge that many American towns were struggling with at the time. Large numbers of unemployed men were moving from place to place looking for work. Many of them arrived in southern Nevada hoping to find jobs connected to the Hoover Dam project. When those jobs did not materialize, some had nowhere else to go. City leaders responded with strict policies. In 1931, the local police department announced what newspapers described as a war on vagrancy. Authorities created a detention area known as the Stockade. It was a fenced compound where people arrested under vagrancy laws could be held. Many of those detained were men who had simply been sleeping outdoors or wandering the streets while searching for work. Historical accounts describe how some prisoners were assigned to clean city alleys and public areas while under guard. These policies reflected the fear and pressure of the time. Las Vegas was still a very small town trying to manage a sudden population of desperate job seekers. Yet the story of those years is not only about harsh enforcement, it is also about the compassion that appeared within the community. Local organizations stepped forward to help families who were struggling the most. Groups such as the American Legion Auxiliary organized programs that provided free meals for children who arrived at school hungry. Records from the period show that hundreds of meals were served in a short time, offering simple food that meant everything to families living through the Depression. Residents also organized holiday food drives and community dinners, so that struggling neighbors would not be forgotten. Even in a city that would later become famous for its nightlife and casinos, many ordinary people quietly worked together to care for one another. In those small acts of kindness, we can see the human side of Las Vegas during one of the most difficult decades in American history. As we reach the end of this journey, it becomes clear that Las Vegas in the 1930s was far from the glowing city we recognize today. It was a harsh desert town shaped by economic struggle, social inequality, and difficult living conditions. Yet, the construction of the Hoover Dam and the legalization of gambling quietly laid the foundation for the Las Vegas that would later rise from the desert. Personally, I find this period both sobering and fascinating, because it reminds us that even famous cities often begin with hardship and resilience. The images you saw throughout this video were created with the help of artificial intelligence to visually represent the history we discussed. They are meant to help bring the story to life. If this story made you think or feel something, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and do not forget to like and share this video so more people can explore these forgotten moments of American history together.